Greetings, adventurers. This is Frydehr, and we're going to be going over today the Condemn build for hardcore that I've been testing out. Essentially, this build is a super tanky build. It helps you get through any sort of T13 rift without any problems. Granted, the one caveat here is that it will take some paragon or some augmentation to get to the level at which you should be comfortably running T13 with this build. That's just forewarning. You're going to start out the season probably in T11 or T12, but as you get more gear, as you get more paragons, you will be able to get into T13 very readily, and it will be a super effective build. Now, one thing I wanted to do with this build was a little different than some of the other builds. I usually run with Goldwrap. Gives you armor the more gold you pick up. It makes you pretty much invulnerable throughout maybe 98% of your gameplay, but there's still that 2% of the time where you get hit with a heavy attack and Goldwrap is down and you don't know that it's down, or you don't realize it, and you either insta-proc or it goes through your proc and you die. And sorry to say, it just happens because you haven't slotted a lot of defense. Otherwise, you're relying on the Goldwrap at that point. You're very squishy when you don't have Goldwrap up. And so what I wanted to do with this build is make sure that I could tank without Goldwrap. So let's get into the gear and skills. We're going to be running a lot of skills here for utility, movement, and defense. Those are the three important aspects I was shooting for here, and the thing we're sacrificing is mostly offense. So we're getting rid of our offense because we don't need quite as much of it in Nephilim Rifts. So that's what we'll be shedding in order to slot all this utility. Firstly, we've got Agrat's Champion. We're using the Icon set. 6-piece gives us damage reduction. We've got the Icon's Addendum, which gives us the Prophet and Embodiment of Power runes on Agrat's Champion. Prophet gives us that second life, armor for defense, of course, and then Embodiment of Power gives us Wrath regeneration, which is quite nice in this setup. We're using the Rally rune to also help reset and keep up our cooldowns on most of our abilities, especially Iron Skin. We're trying to maintain uptime on Iron Skin to protect us from those heavy-hitting attacks like grotesques, molten explosions, any other thing that could kill us almost instantly is what we're going to try and protect ourselves from. So you see a lot of items in the build to help keep this up. We have Laws of Hope, Wings of Angels. This is a movement ability, but it does give a little bit of shielding to the build, and that's minor importance, but it also gives life per second, which is very vital to maintaining your health in this build. It's one method of recovery in the build. Let's see here. We have the double second life with the indestructible passive, Long Arm of the Law to help keep this law active. This also lets us move through enemies, and Waller, which is also another reason we're going to want to try and keep this law up at all times. Heavenly Strength, because we're using a two-hand weapon in this build, and we're also, interestingly enough, we're using Lord Commander, which reduces the cooldown of Steed Charge. That's all we're using it for in this build. Steed Charge is going to be our primary movement skill in this build to get from pack to pack, cross-terrain, bad maps. This will help us get across, and you'll notice when I cast Condemn on autocast and I cast the Horus, Condemn will end the Steed Charge early. We're just using Steed Charge for those little bursts of speed in between our Condemn casts, and we're still going to chain our Condemn casts while we're moving with Steed Charge. That's how it's very effective. We're still killing things while we're on the move. And the idea here is that we're going to use Drawn Quarter, the rune on Steed Charge, to help pull like the trash monsters along with us as we're moving through the rift, to make it very efficient as we are going in between packs. We don't have to stop to kill anything in between elite packs technically, other than picking up items maybe. So that's the cool thing there. Let's see. I'm going to go over some other defensive items. We're using double unity in this build, so you're going to want unity on your Templar and unity on yourself. With the Follower Cannot Die token, of course. This is a solo build, so this is, you know, completely fine to use solo. We're going to be using, let's see, what other defensive items do we have in this build? We are using, actually it doesn't look it, but Avarice Band is quite nice for defense in this build because the extra pickup that it will give is going to prevent you from having to go and pick up any little items. A lot of what I wanted to do with this build was eliminate random elements from that you might put in other builds. So Focus and Restraint might be up, might not be up. You know, it's a little bit more offensive. I wanted to get the extra ring slots. For example, using Gloves of Worship in a softcore build, it's kind of random. You don't always have all of the shrine effects up. Sometimes you may have some, sometimes not others. It's a very random item. So I wanted to exclude those things, but replace them with other items such as Avarice Band for pickup that are more consistent and will help keep you alive, and always know that you have the defense up, you have your utility in place, and always have those available. Part of the defense in this build is also high cooldown. We're slotting a lot of items to keep up our abilities. This is why we're slotting the Leoric's Crown in the primary setup for this build. Helps us get that permanent uptime on Accurate's Champion. Assuming you have cooldown on all the pieces you'll need it on, you should be able to hit that 56%, 56.5% for guaranteed overlap of Accurate's Champion, which is quite nice. Just having the extra cooldown in general is preferred though, because again, we want to keep our Iron Skin as close to 100% uptime as possible. It won't be always up, but it's like pretty much 90% up in this build, which is quite nice. The reason it's 90% is because we're also using Obsidian Ring of the Zodiac, so as our Condemn is hitting enemies, chaining to all these enemies, it will proc the Zodiac, and the Zodiac does have an internal cooldown that prevents it from proccing more than once every so often, but it does proc enough that you will see reduced times on your skills. And the thing about the Zodiac is that it's going to choose randomly, right, between all of your skills. We have a lot of cooldown based skills in this build. Pretty much every skill except Condemn is cooldown based, so it's going to be pretty random as to which one it's choosing, but overall you will have reduced times. You know, you will have close to 100% uptime on your Law, your Iron Skin. You definitely will have uptime on your Accurate's Champion, and you know, you have an insanely quick Steed Charge and higher Provoke for, again, higher Wrath regen as well. The lowered cooldown on this skill basically means if you are desperate, you can have higher Wrath regen on demand. But mostly what we're going to use this for is also a defensive ability. We're using it to reduce the attack speed of enemies. So when you come upon an elite pack, most of the time I save this for elite packs. I'll come up to an elite pack, I'll use it on them, or I'll click the pylon, then I'll immediately use Provoke to slow them and reduce their attack speed, which means those slashers, anything that's fast attacking, heavy melee attacks are going to not hurt you quite as much. And that was the main focus here, especially because I found Rift Guardians as well. I mean, Blighter was wrecking me pretty hard because we don't have the belt String of Ears in this build. That extra melee reduction isn't there, so having a skill in this slot that can reduce the damage that heavy melee attackers do is quite beneficial. Let's see, and so this is one means of getting that, with also getting resource generation. It's also one of the easier skills to use as far as a build, and it's also one of the better skills to have at the beginning of the season, because you're not going to have items that have perfect cooldown, perfect resource reduction on them. You know, these sort of things, having Provoke to supply you with that extra resource is quite nice. Another item that we're using for huge defensive boost here is Esoteric Alteration, and the main reason we're using this is to protect from molten explosions. Other Rift Guardians use a lot of elemental attacks that are heavy hitting, so having the Esoteric in combination with the Unity helps out hugely. And on the same token, by the same token, I wanted to preserve a lot of movement in this build, since the multipliers from Condemn are just so huge. I mean, Blade of Prophecy in combination with a well-rolled, legendary rolled Frydehr will get you very far with this build. So, a lot of movement. We're using Crumb's buff belt. Again, the shielding from Laws of Hope should keep this up 80-90% of the time. Get that nice 25% movement speed bonus. Of course, we are also going to be using a couple of gems for movement. We're using Boon of the Hoarder, both to pick up gold, collect gold, that you're going to need for spending on enhancing rifts, empowering rifts later on in season. It also gives a movement speed boost in combination with the Avarice Band. We'll be picking this up most of the Rift and just giving us that extra boost. We're using Wreath of Lightning. Condemn has a high proc rate, so this should be up most of the Rift, at least 80% of the time, I would think, as you're hitting enemies. We're also using the Warzekian Arm Guards for increased movement. This is 50% move speed every time we destroy an object. Big synergy here in between the Wreath of Lightning and the Warzekian Arm Guards, because this will help proc and destroy items that your Condemn may not be able to hit, since it is a smaller attack. But that'll help you keep you moving through the Rift quite steadily. Again, we're using the Steed Charge for that 150, 175%. I can't remember exactly what it gives, but it gives a huge boost while you're in the horse form. And then the only skill I kind of gave up for movement was Iron Skin Flash. You don't really want to use this in hardcore. I would think the higher uptime of Iron Skin is probably going to be more beneficial here, especially since Iron Skin Flash relies on you getting hit, which I kind of wanted to detract from that with this build, so that's why we didn't go with that option. But again, very high uptime on your Steed Charge in this build, due to both having Zodiac and having that passive Lord's Commander. Anyway, also movement speed, forgot to mention, Laws of Hope gives 50% as well, so this is pretty much constantly on. Consistent movement is going to be huge with this build. It's amazing to play. I love playing this build now that I've put it together and actually seen it in action and what it can do. It's quite nice. So you notice there are a few things that I haven't slotted in this build. I haven't put Trapped in the build. I also sacrificed putting in Finery in favor of higher utility for the build. So those are two items, passives, that would greatly increase the strength of the build, the power of the killing power of the build. However, they don't equate to a better clear, in my opinion. I think for hardcore it would be better to just wait until you get higher strength through paragon or augments, until you get to this 10,000 strength amount. I wouldn't say you should go into T13. I'm around about 900k sheet damage, 10,000 strength. That's when I'd say it's probably safe enough for you to start going into T13 if you want to. You don't have to. You can stay at T12 if you want, but I would definitely, when you're starting this build in season, start out on T11, start out on T12. Don't go just straight into T13. You'll get killed. Part of the big issue is surviving those multiple elite explosions, grotesques, multiple molten explosions, grotesques. Also, there are some, fast attacking elites that can cause trouble. There are also environmental things you have to watch out for on hardcore. So, like the Inferno Hell Act 4 maps that have the furnaces that breathe fire. Those do a lot of damage in T13, more so than T12 anyway. And you can also have the poison pools in that one kind of swampy level, I can't remember, but if you stand in those for too long, you will take a lot of damage. So there are a lot of environmental effects that do impact your capability of playing in T13. Okay, so let's go over affixes now. We're going to I'm also going to mention there are some variations that you can do with this build, which is quite cool to have different variations on affixes. It makes it easier to gear as you're leveling up too. Definitely on your weapon, we're going with Strength, Cooldown, and Wrath per second. I'm going to say that the Wrath regeneration here is the most important roll, so even if you don't have the cooldown and you have perfect rolls on everything else and you're still wearing the Leorics, you're going to have around 55% cooldown. When you're wearing the Zodiac, this pretty much equates to still permanent uptime of Akarat's champion. You don't lose anything by losing the cooldown on the weapon in this sense, so even if all you get on gear is rolling your cooldown to perfect or near perfect, the build will still work. Just having that Wrath regeneration there as a base on your weapon is very nice to have, though. So being able to spam your Condemn is quite important as well. So that's why I'm recommending keep the Wrath regen on your weapon over the cooldown. But as you can see, we do have high enough cooldown on this build once we equip the weapon to get permanent uptime on that Akarat's champion anyway. So cooldown on your shield, of course, on your gloves, on both rings. Perfect cooldown is what you're going to want to look for. On your shoulders as well. And we've got the Leoric's crown, preferably highly rolled, but if you have to make do, a lower legendary percent on the item will make do. Diamond in the helmet, of course, and cooldown in Paragon, of course, is going to be preferred as the first thing you level up in Paragon. Let's see here. The shield and the shoulder piece. There is an option here. I'm going to recommend resource on the shoulders as well. At the beginning of the season, this will be harder to put on the shield, but you're in luck because I tested a rift without this roll, and though it was harder to maintain the resource, with Provoke, it's fairly easy to keep up your resource even without that resource roll. It's a little bit more challenging to manage the rotation of Provoke without this resource roll. That's why I recommend it, but it's doable. You can make it by. So until you get this extra resource roll, you can just run with, Strength Vite, All Resist, cooldown, shoulder, whatever you get in season will be fine. But again, my preference is to run with Strength, Vitality, instead of All Resistance on the shoulder. Strength, Vitality, cooldown, and then resource. That would be perfect in my opinion. And then for the shield, I really enjoyed having the extra Vitality here as well. So going Strength, Vite, crit, and then cooldown would be preferred here. The alternate setup is you could roll Wrath per second on your shield. So if you're running, for example, shoulders like this that for whatever reason didn't roll Vitality, you might have to put some Paragon into Vitality to make up with this setup. As you can see, we went down from about 700k hit points all the way to 487. So if you're missing Vitality on your shoulder, definitely put some Paragon, maybe 500 points into Vitality, just to get you up to the minimum of 550 hit points. You're going to want to get to 550 hit points with this build. If you don't have that much, you're going to die from Molten Explosions, Grotesques. Other heavy hitting attacks can still proc you, and it's worrisome to be below this amount. So perfect again on the shoulders would be having Vitality instead of All Resist, but if you have to manage by putting some Vite into Paragon into Vite, that is okay as well. Okay, so another roll here you could do is if you don't have the resource on your shoulders, you could do Wrath per second instead here. You could also put Condemn damage on your shield if you want to go gear offensively. I don't recommend that, but you could put Condemn damage here as well. That's another option on the shield. As you can see, I have a lot more HP when I put this on. Let's see, so for resource, you're going to have resource on your ring because we're using Zodiac, and we don't need attack speed in this build. We're going to be using a resource Zodiac, which is quite different from some other builds. And then, of course, you will have the resource on the shoulder to give you a nice about 24%, 23% wrath cost reduction. In combination with the wrath regen on your weapon is quite nice, and in combination with the Akarat's champion with the embodiment of power rune, all combines to give you enough wrath regen with the Provoke to run through the rift. Here we have, you're going to want basically crit on your shield, crit on your Zodiac, crit on your Unity. You're going to want crit on your gloves, crit hit damage on your gloves. You're going to want crit hit damage, crit on your amulet. You're going to want holy damage instead of strength, as I have here on your amulet as well. So perfect will be holy crit crit. You're going to crit and holy damage on your bracer, of course, and then you'll be good to go as far as damage modifiers are concerned. Chest piece, I do recommend Condemn damage here. If you want to go super tanky, you could put elite damage, but I do recommend just going with Condemn damage on your chest piece. It's quite nice to have that little bit extra there. As far as other defensive affixes are concerned, you're going to want to go for Vitality on your helmet is fairly important, and I forgot the crit on the helmet as well. Vitality is very important to have on your helmet, as well as the strength. I don't have strength here. I took out some of my gems for testing, but you get the idea. Strength and vitality on your chest piece, strength, vitality on your pants with all resist here. Belt, you're going to want all resist as well, so it would be strength, vite, all resist, and then I do recommend some recovery in the build. We're going to want life per second here on your belt, and probably life per second on the boots as well. Preferred here would be strength, vite, all resist, life per second. And you're going to want to look out for wherever we don't have all resist on items. Secondary resistances are nice to have, and then as another modifier nice to have would be % gold fine, just to increase the gold gains you get when you're going through the rift in season. So it's not an essential affix, but having it there would be nice to have. Range damage reduction also pretty good on either your chest piece or your amulet, so that's another nice one to have there. As far as regen goes, remember you also have the Templar, so he's going to be healing you and also supplying you with some extra life per second, so an extra recovery there from the Templar. He also gives you a little bit more wrath while you're in combat, so he's probably the best follower in my opinion to bring with you. Then of course, I forgot to mention, but this build we do have the Nemesis Bracers in the cube, giving us those elite spawns. Very important for progress. As far as affixes though, I think that's it. So that'll get you up and beyond as far as you need to go as far as hardcore is concerned. We are going diamonds in the chest and pants as well, so you're going to want to go diamond in the helm, diamond in the pants and chest for that extra all resist to get it up to that, close to that, 1,000 resistance amount would be highly beneficial to the build. Alright, so now let's get into some swaps you can make, and I tested many different builds till I settled on this one. But this was the best setup, of course, but there is a lot of freedom with this skill slot here. You can swap out Provoke for quite a few different skills. The first of which that worked extremely well was Slash Guard. The generator here, it does generate 5 wrath per attack, does bridge that gap of resource, especially when you have the second resource roll on your shoulder piece to keep up your wrath throughout the rift. It also gives you a hefty 25% armor when it's at max stacks, and it stays up for about 5 seconds or so. As long as you're hitting at least one enemy, it does refresh to max. If you want to go the tankiest you could be in hardcore, definitely strive to get perfect rolls on gear and then go for slash guard, because this will give you that increased armor to help you tank all those heavy hitting attacks extremely well and just survive anything. So if you're really concerned about surviving that much, you can go slash guard. That's being said, I did find it slowed me down in the Rift because I was stopping more to melee enemies rather than just running through them and charging through them with my horse, with my steed charge. I was stopping a lot more to keep up slash guard, but even if you're only using the slash guard when you're engaging elites and the Rift Guardian, it's still a very effective thing to have, or skill to have. Alright, these next few skill swaps I found were also very effective, but they did require a swap out of an item, and by that mention, they probably require perfect cooldown on gear to be able to do this. Basically what I did was I swapped out Leorics for the Pride's Fall, which helped give us the extra resource that we would need throughout the Rift. And then, of course, you can swap out for any skill that doesn't even require a resource. So if you want, say, higher life regeneration or life per second, you could go for Consecration. And that will help you heal through a lot of the ground effects, a lot of the different effects that go on. Having this skill here in combination with the Pride's Fall, you know, making up the resource, allows you to get through the Rift very smoothly. And again, this is a cooldown based ability, so it will not always be up, but thanks to the Rally Rune and your high cooldown in this setup, it's up fairly often, so you can put it down when you're engaging most elite packs. And I found this to be the best, if you're going for life regeneration, the best skill to use in that sense. Another one, continuing again, the downside to using Pride's Fall, of course, is we drop down to about 53% cooldown, which means you won't have permanent uptime of Acrats, but again, we're using Zodiac, so I'd say 99% of the time your Acrats champion will be up anyway, because you'll at least have hit one enemy in the Rift, or a couple of enemies to help proc your Acrats once or twice to bridge the gap there. So that's also a cool skill to use in combination with the Pride's Fall. You can also use Judgment, Debilitate. This, whereas the Consecration with the life per second helps out a little bit more for when you're taking a constant stream of hits, it helps keep up your health in that way. This, it does not help out with heavy hitting and melee attacks, which is the primary concern that I was having with this skill. So, you know, as with the Slash Guard and the Provoke, those also help reduce the damage of melee attackers, but the Consecration will not, which is the downside of using Consecration. Judgment Debilitate is another option you can use in combination with Pride's Fall, and this, it's a 20-yard ability. It's also on a shorter cooldown, so you can spam it a lot more, as often as you would Provoke, basically. And so you can keep this up pretty much all the time. Anytime you're engaging in an elite pack or the Rift Guardian, this will be up 90% of the time on your enemies and give you that extra 40% reduced damage. The Immobilize is also quite useful. It helps you pin enemies in place. I've used it on even goblins in the Rift. It's quite handy to have. So that'll be pretty much about it for this build guide. Main reason I wanted to put this together is I want to go hardcore Crusader next season, I think, and the free set that comes with the Hadrig's Gift next season is the Icon set for Crusader, which would be very handy and getting an early boost up in seasons in general, but this build in particular will help you out in hardcore, and I hope you've enjoyed this guide very much. Stick around, I've got more video footage of some of the swaps I previously mentioned, and as always, I'll catch you in the rifts.